The Haunting of Maple Street. Kara had always dreamed of owning a charming old house. When she found the small Victorian on Maple Street, she knew it was the one. The house was nestled between two towering oaks, with ivy crawling up its brick walls. It was perfect, or so she thought. The first few nights were peaceful. Kara spent her evenings unpacking and settling into her new home, enjoying the quiet solitude. But on the fourth night, everything changed. It started with the whispers. Kara had just finished reading in bed when she heard a faint voice, so soft she almost convinced herself it was the wind. She rolled over, trying to ignore it, but the voice came again, this time clearer, more distinct. A woman's voice, barely above a whisper, called her name, Kara. Her heart skipped. She sat up, the room cold despite the warmth of her blankets. She glanced around but saw nothing out of place. The house was quiet again. Thinking it was just her imagination, Kara tried to go back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was standing just beside her bed. Kara. The voice came again, but now it was colder, sharper. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Terrified, Kara tried to convince herself it was just the house settling. After all, it was old. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed her from room to room, growing louder each time, until one night, she couldn't take it any longer. Kara decided to investigate. She went down to the basement, where the whispers seemed to be the strongest. The air was thick with dust, and the old wooden steps creaked beneath her weight. As she reached the bottom, she felt an overwhelming coldness, and the whispering stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, a sound, a faint scraping, like nails against wood. Turning her flashlight toward the sound, Kara's heart stopped. In the corner of the basement, half hidden by shadows, was a mirror, old, cracked, and covered in dust. But what chilled Kara to the bone wasn't the mirror itself, it was the reflection in it. Behind her, standing in the corner of the basement, was a woman. Her long, black hair hung in tangled knots around a pale face, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She wore an old-fashioned white dress, stained with what looked like dark rust. The woman's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Kara spun around, but the corner was empty. She turned back to the mirror. The woman was still there, standing silently behind her. The whispers came again, louder this time, filled with pain and anger. "You shouldn't have come." Kara stumbled back in horror, the flashlight shaking in her hand. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. She bolted up the stairs, hearing the woman's footsteps following her. As she reached the top of the stairs, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panicked, Kara tried the door. It wouldn't budge. The temperature in the room dropped to an icy chill, and she felt the presence behind her again, standing just inches away. "Leave, before it's too late." The ghost's voice hissed, now a screeching whisper in her ear. Kara turned around to see the woman, her face twisted in anguish, her eyes burning with fury. She reached out, fingers curled like claws, just as Kara screamed in terror. But before the ghost could touch her, the entire room went black. When Kara woke, she was lying on the floor in the living room. The sun was rising, casting a soft light through the windows. The house was eerily quiet, as though nothing had happened. The door was open. Confused and terrified, she rushed outside, breathing in the fresh morning air. But when she looked back at the house, her stomach dropped. There, on the porch, was a blotch of deep red, staining the steps, as if something had been dragged through it. It wasn't rain. It wasn't paint. And in the center of the blotch, written in dark, smeared letters. "Leave now, or be next." Kara turned, her blood running cold. The woman's voice whispered in her ear one final time, soft but chilling, "You're not the first." And as Kara fled down the street, she swore she could hear the woman's footsteps, following her, always behind. Kara's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted down Maple Street, her breath ragged and desperate. She dared not look back, but she could feel it, those footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing behind her, no matter how fast she ran. Every step she took seemed to be met with one from the unseen pursuer, growing louder, closer, as though the distance between them was closing with every heartbeat. She reached the corner of the street, where the shadows of the towering oak trees stretched long in the early morning light. The wind had picked up again, swirling the leaves around her feet. But the sound of footsteps didn't stop. They were still there. Closer now. Almost in rhythm with her own. She spun around, her eyes wild with fear. There was no one. The street was empty, save for the distant hum of the city waking up. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she gripped the hem of her jacket. But when she turned back toward the house, she saw it, the woman. Standing on the porch, watching her. Silent. Eyes hollow. Her long, tangled hair moved unnaturally in the wind, as though she was the one causing it. Kara froze, dread filling her chest. The woman's lips parted, but no sound came. Yet Kara could hear the words in her mind, whispered in that voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. You can't run from me. Kara stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, barely catching herself before crashing to the ground. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She turned and ran again, faster now, desperate to put as much distance between herself and the house as possible. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed for air, but the footsteps kept following. Louder. Closer. A sharp, icy wind swept around her, causing the trees to creak and groan. Kara's breath came out in sharp gasps as she turned another corner, but this time, something felt different. The streets were darker. The houses around her looked unfamiliar, as though she had crossed into another part of town. She wasn't sure if she was running in circles or if the world itself was shifting, warping, bending around her. The sound of footsteps was louder than ever now, right behind her. Kara's pulse raced. She was sure she could feel the woman's cold breath on the back of her neck. She whipped around again, ready to confront whatever horror was chasing her. And there, just a few steps away, the woman stood again. But this time, the ghost wasn't alone. Behind her, more figures emerged, dozens of them, all women, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes empty and dark. They wore tattered white dresses, stained with the same rust-colored marks. They were silent, their eyes fixed on Kara, but they didn't move. Kara's breath hitched as the air around her grew colder. She tried to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. The women started walking toward her, their movements slow and deliberate, as though they were in no rush. Each step they took was like a death knell, growing louder and louder. Then, the woman at the front, the woman, spoke again, her voice scraping against Kara's mind like fingernails on a chalkboard. You shouldn't have come here. You'll never leave. Suddenly, everything went still. The air was thick with an oppressive silence. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the world around Kara started to shift again, distorting as though she were caught in a dream. She closed her eyes, shaking uncontrollably, wishing she could wake up from this nightmare. But when she opened them again, the street had disappeared. The houses, the trees, the people, all gone. She was back at the old house on Maple Street, standing at the foot of the porch steps. The door creaked open. Kara wanted to run. She needed to run. But her body wouldn't obey. She was frozen in place as the shadows in the doorway lengthened, a figure standing in the threshold. The woman. This time, she smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a twisted, malevolent grin that sent ice coursing through Kara's veins. Welcome home. And before Kara could react, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The footsteps behind her started again. Closer. Louder. As she looked toward the door, her heart sank. There was a figure standing in the window now, watching her, a pale face with hollow eyes. The same face as before. You can't leave, the voice whispered again, this time louder than ever. And then, the air grew thick. Dark. Cold. Kara felt a pressure on her chest as the ground beneath her began to crack, the pavement splitting open. The figures, the ghostly women, began to close in around her, their whispers rising in unison. Before the darkness consumed her, Kara heard one final whisper. You're one of us now. Then, there was nothing but silence. When the morning sun rose, Maple Street was quiet once again. The old house sat at the end of the road, as it always had, with the same shadowed windows. No sign of Kara. But if anyone were to walk by that morning, they might notice something strange. On the front porch, just below the door, there was a small, dark blotch. A stain. And the whispers began again. It had been weeks since Kara's disappearance. The police had come and gone, conducting their searches, but they never found any trace of her. The old house on Maple Street stood silent, its windows dark and empty. Neighbors whispered about the strange things that had happened in the past, strange disappearances, strange noises, but no one ever dared to venture close to the house. After all, the town had its secrets, and some things were better left alone. But then, one fateful night, a woman named Emily, new to the town and unaware of the house's dark history, moved into the neighborhood. She was young, excited, and eager to start fresh in a small, quiet town far from her past. She had heard about the house on Maple Street, the one that had been empty for so long, but she wasn't one to believe in ghosts or strange rumors. One evening, as Emily took a walk to explore her new surroundings, her path led her down Maple Street. She couldn't help but notice the eerie old house at the end of the road. Its weathered exterior and overgrown ivy looked like something out of a horror movie. She stood there for a moment, gazing up at the house, wondering about its history. But before she could think too much about it, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine, as though she were being watched. Shaking off the unease, Emily turned to walk back toward her house, but something stopped her. The door to the house on Maple Street creaked open just a little, as though inviting her inside. Curiosity got the better of her. She crossed the street, walking up the cracked stone path toward the door. It seemed so strange. Why would the door be open? Her heart raced, but she tried to push down the growing sense of dread. She raised her hand to knock but hesitated. Something about this place felt wrong. Still, she told herself it was just an old house. An old, abandoned house. Just as she was about to turn away, the door opened wider, as if urging her to step inside. With a shaky breath, Emily stepped over the threshold, the air inside cool and musty. The door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. She spun around, startled, but saw nothing unusual. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaking. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. The only sound was the faint creaking of the floorboards beneath her feet. She took a few steps forward, feeling the darkness close and around her. Her breath grew shallow, and her skin prickled as though something unseen was watching her. "Is anyone here?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Just then, a cold gust of wind swept through the house, rattling the windows. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. She turned the corner and immediately froze in place. In front of her, standing at the foot of the stairs, was a figure. A woman, dressed in tattered white, with long, unkempt black hair that hung in tangled strands around her pale face. Her eyes were hollow, lifeless, and empty. The woman's lips parted in a twisted, silent scream. Emily gasped, her heart racing. She tried to back away, but her legs felt like lead. The woman didn't move, but Emily could feel her presence pressing in on her, suffocating her. The temperature in the room dropped to an impossible chill, and Emily's breath came out in visible puffs. "You shouldn't have come." The words echoed in her mind, their chilling resonance vibrating in her skull. The woman took a step forward. Then another. Emily turned and ran, her footsteps pounding in the silence. She darted through the hallway, scrambling toward the front door. But as she reached for the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. Panic gripped her chest. She pulled harder, twisting the knob, but the door remained locked, trapped inside. The house seemed to pulse around her, the walls closing in. Shadows flickered in the corners of her eyes. Then, she heard the whispers. "Leave, now, or be next." The whispers came from everywhere, surrounding her. She spun around, trying to find their source, but the woman was gone. The house seemed to breathe, the air thick with the feeling of being watched. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Emily saw something move. A shadow flitted across the hallway. She turned toward it, her eyes widening in disbelief. There, standing in the doorway to the basement, was a small blotch of dark red, like a stain on the floor. The same blotch she had seen when Kara first disappeared. The same stain. Before she could take another step, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She whipped around, but there was no one there. Just the empty, dark hallway. "You're not alone." The voice was right behind her. Emily spun, but the woman, the ghost, was there, standing inches from her face, her hollow eyes staring into her very soul. With a scream, Emily bolted toward the basement door, desperate to escape. She pulled it open, rushing down the steps into the darkness. The air was thick with dampness and decay. And then, she saw it. The basement mirror, the same one Kara had seen before, stood against the far wall, cracked and covered in layers of dust. But this time, the reflection wasn't just her own. Behind her, in the mirror, was the woman again, standing silently, her fingers curled like claws. But something was different. The woman's face was now covered in dark, blood-stained handprints, smears that seemed to have come from within the mirror itself. Emily turned, her heart pounding in her chest, but the basement was empty. No one there. Just the oppressive darkness. The mirror, however, remained the same, staring back at her, showing something she didn't understand. "You're one of us now." The whisper filled her mind, sending a cold shiver down her spine. As Emily turned to flee, she felt the air around her grow thicker. Her legs gave way beneath her, and the world spun. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the shadow of the woman, reaching for her, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. The next morning, the house on Maple Street stood quiet and empty. But if anyone dared to walk past, they might notice something new. On the porch, just below the door, was a blotch of dark red, staining the steps once again. The same stain. The same warning. And in the window above the porch, someone could almost swear they saw a figure watching. Emily's body lay on the cold, damp basement floor, her eyes wide open but unseeing. The world around her seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, as if time itself had slowed down, allowing the darkness to swallow her whole. The echo of the woman's whisper still lingered in her ears, like a distant hum that refused to fade. When Emily awoke, the house had changed. It was no longer the same Victorian home she had stepped into that first evening. The air was thicker now, heavy with a suffocating silence that pressed down on her chest. The basement was colder, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. It felt as though the house itself was alive, breathing, shifting in response to her presence. Her head ached as she sat up, her hands trembling as they pushed against the cold stone floor. The mirror across the room still stood, its cracked surface reflecting the dim light of the basement, but there was something different about it. The image that stared back at her wasn't her own. The woman, the one from her nightmares, stood in the mirror, her hollow eyes fixed on Emily. Her lips curled into that twisted grin, and Emily felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The woman reached out from the mirror, her fingers stretching as if to pull Emily into the reflection. Emily scrambled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She stumbled to her feet, her legs weak and unsteady. She needed to get out of there. She needed to escape. But the house had other plans. As Emily reached for the basement door, the walls seemed to close in on her. The air grew colder still, and the whispers began again. This time, they weren't just in her head, they filled the room, surrounding her with voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once. "You belong to her now. We're all here, waiting. You can't leave. You will never leave." Panic set in as Emily turned toward the stairs, but before she could make it up, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the entire house. She was trapped. Her heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from the door, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She had to get out. There had to be a way. And then, she saw it, the blotch. It was no longer just a small stain on the floor. It had spread, seeping into the walls and the floorboards, like blood staining the very foundation of the house. The same dark red, the same warning that had been left behind by Kara. And the longer Emily stared at it, the more she could feel its pull. Like it was alive. Like it was calling to her. A sudden realization struck her, cold and terrifying. She was no longer alone in this house. The whispers grew louder, drowning out her thoughts. She could feel the presence of the other spirits, the ones who had been trapped here before her, whose souls were bound to this cursed place. They were all around her, their angry, vengeful energy swirling in the air. You should have never come. You'll never escape. You are ours. Emily's mind reeled. She needed to leave. She had to escape, but the house was closing in around her. The walls were shifting, twisting in impossible ways, like they were alive. The windows were now black, as if covered by an endless night. The door remained shut, locked by an unseen force. As she frantically searched for another way out, she saw the woman again, standing at the foot of the stairs, her expression twisted into a mocking grin. Her long, cold fingers curled an invitation, beckoning Emily to come closer. "It's too late," the woman whispered, her voice seeping into Emily's very bones. "You are one of us now." With a scream, Emily turned and ran toward the mirror, the only thing in the house that still seemed to have some kind of power. She had to get to it. She had to destroy it. But as she approached, the mirror shimmered, and the image of the woman inside shifted. She was no longer just standing there, now, she was reaching out, her fingers elongating, twisting, until they were just inches from Emily's face. In one final burst of desperation, Emily lunged at the mirror, trying to break its hold on her. But as her hand touched the glass, it felt like ice, sharp, cold, and unyielding. The mirror shattered with a violent crack, sending shards of glass flying in all directions. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, Emily saw it, reflected in the broken pieces of the mirror. There were dozens of faces, their expressions twisted in agony, their eyes hollow and empty. The spirits that had once been trapped in this house stared back at her, their faces a mirror of her own terror. And in the center of them all, the woman smiled, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The walls shook, the house groaned, and the shadows began to close in, tightening around Emily like a noose. "You can never leave. You will never leave." And then, the darkness took her.